Welcome in here on Live Now from Fox, and you are taking a live look over Gaza here at the Israel border as we do get to some breaking news that we are following at this hour. Take a look here as reports from Hebrew media now saying the head of Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, is expecting there to meet with the Prime Minister of Qatar and the CIA director in Warsaw. Qatar has been involved in negotiations between Israel and Hamas, leading many to believe that this could mean another deal is in the works for the release of additional hostages that were taken by Hamas back on October 7th. In the meantime, Israel is also blaming Iran and Hezbollah for an attempted cyber attack on Israel's Ziv Medical Center. The attack a short time ago, Israel says, did aim to disrupt hospital operations, but it was not successful. We also know that U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has arrived in Israel, where he is meeting with Netanyahu and other top officials. Austin expected to press Israel to wind down major combat operations in Gaza. Want to talk about all of that. As you can tell, a lot developing just over the last few hours. So let's bring in Dr. Melanie Garson, an associate professor in conflict resolution and international security at University College London, joining us now to talk more about all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, first off here, just break down this bit of breaking news. Your thoughts as we know that the Mossad chief there is going to meet with all of these officials. Could it mean that another deal is in the works?
It is possible. There's been extraordinary pressure brought on the Israeli government since the tragic events on Friday, culminating from what I understand from the breaking news in the Hebrew media that the families of the hostages have actually blocked the entrance to the Kiryat in Tel Aviv. So that's one of the major central functions where the war cabinet has been sitting to express their need to have some resolution on it. It's likely to be an extremely difficult negotiations. We know this has been mooted for a couple of days, and Hamas has already set out some of what they believe should be the terms of what this deal would look like. And there has been a little bit of discussion prior to this meeting as what the terms could look like, but it's not going to be an easy one.
And it does sound like that is what the families of the hostages want, as you mentioned, especially since everything did play out just several days ago with the 3 Israeli hostages that the IDF says were killed there by IDF troops. So it sounds like that is what the families are pushing for, is another maybe temporary ceasefire, but really the release of those additional hostages.
Absolutely. And with one of the stated aims of the actual war as it stands, with the dismantling of Hamas, the second one, securing the border communities, and the third one, the release of the hostages. To date, they've not been able to get any further hostages out alive. There's been increasing accounts from some of the freed hostages talking about the pressure also of the bombings, of the Israeli activity in keeping the hostages alive, and the families want to see the commitment from the government to prioritize the hostage release as soon as possible.
And I brought this up right before we started talking to you here, but this is breaking news that is coming in here about this attempted cyber attack. Israel blaming Iran and Hezbollah for that attempted cyber attack. And this statement released on Twitter, or X, depending what you call it, by Eylon Levy, a spokesperson for the Israeli government, saying that Iran and Hezbollah attempted a cyber attack on Ziv Medical Center, trying and failing to disrupt its operations. We expect ICRC and WHO, which haven't condemned Hamas missile strikes on Israeli hospitals, to condemn this. Hospitals are not, quote, not a target. What are your thoughts on this? Because we're talking about a hospital that is something that needs its online systems as they are treating so many patients.
This is an increasing problem that we're seeing as war also emerges into the cyber domain. This was something that was tested out in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and has been a question under international law as whether the Geneva Convention protections are also afforded to attacks in the cyber domain. The general consensus is that, yes, humanitarian operations and hospitals, just as they would be in their kinetic reality, if their physical entities are protected exactly the same way, and therefore this would be considered an attack. It would be considered technically a breach of sovereignty, and it should emerge have the condemnation of the ICRC, particularly because the ICRC have recently published actually a series of guidelines of how hacktivists or criminal groups should behave in conflict and how the laws do apply for them under international law.
Netanyahu held a very, I would say, detailed news conference over the weekend alongside other Israeli officials. It went on for a good hour or so. What are your thoughts? What stood out to you about that news conference that was held? This, of course, coming on the heels of those Israeli hostages being killed by Israel.
It was an extremely difficult news conference for any leader to have to hold. The national heartbreak at that moment in time, with the accounts that have come out that people were globally, but particularly as that news came out, were rendered speechless for a long period of time. There was the heartbreak is unfathomable on top of the already heartbreak. He used the time to try to reiterate the main goals of the conflict, to try and frame it within this wider mission of long-term Israeli security. There was no way that, this could be rationalized. Well, the Israeli Joint Chiefs of Staff, they have taken responsibility that this was a breach of protocol. They're investigating what happened. They have reiterated to the Chief of Staff gave a very strong speech to the soldiers in the field to remind them what the protocols are. But it was a speech where he was trying to paper the cracks over, and as we've seen today, there was mass outrage with the families of the hostages as this happened, and to try and smooth over very, very, big cracks right now as to maintaining the support for the ongoing war.
And that was my next question here is, does this change anything about the global support? We do know that the U.S. is a very close ally of Israel. We heard some comments from President Biden just last week where he kind of openly criticized Netanyahu, possibly for the first time, and called it, quote, indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. Does this change anything about the war overall?
I am not sure that actually ironically, the incident with the hostages itself has changed the global perspective. And some of the feedback coming out of Israel, I think actually with the families of the hostages, there's been this push to release the hostages, but there's also still a very strong understanding that there cannot be a resolution that doesn't bring security to the border communities, doesn't bring the dismantling of Hamas. In relation to the context of President Biden's comments, the question of whether the bombings are indiscriminate, I think is challenging. I think from what we've seen, Israel has been, and I think by the same token, you had John Kirby also state that the military is acting in a way that the US probably has never done or wouldn't do in notifying exactly where they're going to operate in order to clear the area of civilians. But I think the argument is not that their actions are indiscriminate, whether the level of intensity or aggression is going beyond the threshold that's tolerable, I think is the bigger question. And I think that is what's challenging support. But even within the UK, as sort of Lord Cameron said this week, it's not yet pushing for an immediate ceasefire, but what they call a sustainable ceasefire. And that really needs to have the vision of what does a solid, strong, lasting ceasefire actually look like, and what will be the conditions that need to be met in order to be able to build that.
And we did learn over the weekend that the USS Carney shot down at least 14 Houthi drones in the Red Sea. That happening Saturday, but also a Royal Navy warship shot down a suspected attack drone that was targeting commercial ships in the Red Sea. Why does it appear that the Houthis are targeting these ships? And is it showing any signs of letting up anytime soon?
This is a really interesting, wider dimension to the conflict. The on the face of it claim is that they're trying to stop any goods reaching Israel as an expression of their support for the Palestinians. We know that the Houthis are Iranian-backed. We know this is a proxy operation, and it's interesting that some of the ships being targeted over the weekend and up to today actually weren't even heading to Israel. Some of them on their manifest, particularly the Liberian ship, were aimed for Jeddah, for Saudi. So it's taking on a wider dimension. I think the question will be in the sense that is this actually Iran acting very opportunistically to assert dominance over this particular area of water, and I think that's why we're seeing the increased calls for coalition, and the French minister saying that actually this needs to be reinforced, the coalition needs to be reinforced because it can't let the conflict with Israel and Hamas actually possibly cloud something bigger that may be going on with Iranian ambition in the Red Sea.
Israel's ambassador to the UK did say that a two-state solution was not going to happen, but then Rishi Sunak says that he supports a two-state solution. Can you kind of explain the controversy over that as it does continue? Because we heard that first statement, and then we heard Sunak's kind of follow-up there.
I think that what happened with Ambassador Khatami is very reflective of the huge amount of pain that exists within Israel's society at the moment. Anybody with integrity and rationality, and I'm not saying that Ambassador Khatami didn't have it at that moment, but I think at that moment it's very reflective of the deep, deep, deep emotion and hurt and a lack of understanding of what can be the long-term vision. I think most people who are familiar and understand the region know that the long-term solution lies in two people finding a way to live side by side with dignity and rights and a strong economy and a future. I think what is missing at the moment globally is a real sense of what that vision looks like tangibly, and how that has to exist with security, how it needs to be demilitarized, how the narratives need to shift massively to do that. We know there's still even Palestinian-led surveys show a huge amount of support still for Hamas in the West Bank, let alone probably high, though definitely higher in the West Bank within Gaza. What that structure looks like that can afford both sides security and dignity side by side seems to be missing at the moment. So I think it's the two-state solution that was envisioned, I don't think is the space it is now. I think building towards what that transitional administration might look like to be able to create that trust. Where is the visionary leadership going to come from that's really going to commit to moving these two peoples forward into a space where both can at least, let's not even use the word, coexist side by side productively and peacefully is, I think, what people can't see right now.
We talk a lot about the U.S. relationship between, obviously, the U.S. and Israel, but because you are there with the University College London, I want to get your take on this. What is the relationship like between Israel and the U.K. right now as we are about 10 weeks into the war?
I think it's shifting slightly. The pressure on the UK government is greater, I think, than in the US. So it's a smaller country, so the voice is heard. The current government has always been committed to Israel defending itself in this position. I think the shift is becoming, and I don't think it's entirely reflective of what's happening in the US. And sometimes if that is the talk that diplomatically the UK benchmarks itself just a little bit behind, sort of one step lower than where the US actually acts in its support. But Lord Cameron's statement has, as I said, was working towards what they call this sustainable ceasefire. It's still sticking by Israel's right to defend and secure itself as a sovereign nation, looking towards how this can be best mitigated to try to avert the humanitarian crisis that is heartbreaking and equally tragic for the Palestinians as well. So the push towards opening up the Kerem Shalom crossing for more humanitarian aid to be checked, those sort of measures, I think we'll see the UK pushing towards more.
All right, Dr. Melanie Garson there at University College London. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and provide the latest information. Is there anything else you want to add here about any of this before I let you go?
No, I think our eyes will all be on Warsaw right now to see what the terms of those agreements. I think it will turn on this question of Hamas wanting to control the lists and to see they decide who the lists rather than vice versa. I think that's going to be the cause of contention. We know that there's 20 people who are already likely to be dead within that list. So it's and of course everybody's waiting to see what happens to the Bibas family. Of course, the youngest hostage is still there, 10-month-old and a 4-year-old baby, and urging for their safe return quickly.
All right, Dr. Garson, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
You too. And I do want to take you back out to this live image that we do have showing the Israel-Gaza border right there as we get to the latest information, that breaking news we have been talking about. The Mossad chief there is going to meet in Warsaw with the CIA director and the Qatari prime minister, but it appears that they are going to be discussing the efforts to find a new hostage deal. The information we have is coming from Hebrew media at this hour. The Ynet news site quotes a source involved as saying the talks would be, quote, long, complicated, and more difficult than before. We know that Qatar was a key mediator in the first hostage deal that saw 105 civilians released from Hamas captivity in Gaza. We also have this other breaking news that we are following at this hour involving the war, and I do want to take you out to this tweet coming in from Eylon Levy. He is the spokesperson for the Israeli government. Now, this is all related to an attempted cyber attack. So Israel is saying that Iran and Hezbollah are guilty of trying to attack the hospital here with a cyber attack. The attack a short time ago, Israel says, did aim to disrupt hospital operations, but it was not successful. This tweet from Eylon Levy says Iran and Hezbollah attempted a cyber attack on Ziv Medical Center, trying and failing to disrupt its operations. We expect ICRC and who haven't condemned Hamas missile strikes on Israeli hospitals to condemn this. Hospitals are not, quote, not a target. As we get more details on all of this, we're going to bring it to you right here on Live Now from Fox.